this side, you're going to have information which I can access. So if I want to look at learning ability, I want to look at something like form perception, or let's say that I want to go down and I want to take a look at what is the, and you did some work with the self-directed search, right? You talked about that a little bit, Holland codes.
In another class, but they'll go through it briefly here. But it's a great counseling.
Okay, there are about 42 systems of looking at personality. And John Holland was a pragmatist. He said, why don't we take a look at personality in terms of its relationship to work? So using factor analysis, statistics, he came up with 6 constellations of personality. And the idea is to pick out the 3 main constellations for any given occupation, which increases the probability if we take personality into consideration. The way I like to define personality, it's the sum total habitual ways you go about doing things. Looked at another definition, personality is the circuitry through which your ability goes. And I do believe personality is changeable. Okay, so I'm not one of those that believes it's hardwired. Now, so if we want to take a look at something like that, or we want to take a look at values related to this, because we're going to do some values exploration, we have that. So then, if we want to look at other information related to a given occupation like wages, we can take a look at wages where in the United States might we be talking about. And then we can drill into the data. So let's say we're saying, let's say we want to get a snapshot, a basic snapshot of all states. So here it is. Here's a basic snapshot of all states, looking at things like the mean wage, mean earning for years, median. So we look at that. So you know that when the standard deviation is really wide, this is where the median can come in and save you. But as the standard deviation narrows, the median becomes less valuable because you can really take a look at earnings based on standard deviations. We're going to talk about that. By the way, I forgot to tell you, this data is used in court every day of the week. So practitioners who do Social Security cases, practitioners who do insurance cases, and so all around the country, this data is stood up in court. So then if we want to take a look at something like, does anybody get rich in a given occupation? So we can look at different states. And by the way, we define getting rich as the Pareto curve. That's the right tail. So if we look at the Pareto distribution, Dr. Pareto was fascinated by what happens at that little tail over there. So let's say that you want to look at states where you might be a superstar wages, and I'll show you what that means in a moment. Then you can look at this distribution right here. Now, if I want to take a look at, say, the state of Michigan. Now what we can do is we can take the state of Michigan and we can break this down into sub-state areas. Now, by the way, where does this data come from? Well, the Census Department is out there every month collecting data. So they don't just wake up every 10 years. So they do something called a current population survey, and they're out there surveying companies and talking to individuals. And so we can actually take data and break it down into sub-state areas. Now, what we do, and this will be in the little paper that I have over here that'll be available to all of you, is we created a statistical model where we can take data samples from different years, correct for inflation and wage drift, and combine the samples. It's a very legitimate statistical technique. Thereby, in smaller occupations, expanding the sample size and decreasing the standard deviation of the data. Does that make sense to you? In other words, we're decreasing the variance. So as you get more and more people in your sample, you can decrease the variance. So it gets very iffy. Now, what we do is we do not do this what-if stuff. If there are no nuclear engineers in Copper Harbor, Michigan, we don't do this what if there was or were nuclear engineers in Copper Harbor, Michigan, because there aren't any. So we don't try to what if and provide that data. Now, let's say that you will notice, by the way, that wherever possible, we break the data down into female and male. And now don't shoot the messenger here, because you can see the wage differential in many areas, but it's not true in all. The reason I believe that women get underpaid in many cases is because you're not aware of what the going rate is, so you get lowballed. So that's why we break this down into male and female. And this way, when we prepare our clients, they don't get lowballed. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the Detroit, Ann Arbor, Flint, Consolidated Metropolitan Statistical Areas. So the Consolidated Metropolitan Statistical Area is for sampling, because at one time Detroit had 2 million people. Wayne County doesn't have 2 million people. So consequently, what they do then is when they do the sampling, and I'm just going to go down here for a second. When we talk about the Consolidated Metropolitan Statistical Area, we're talking about Lenawee, Livingston, Washtenaw, Lapeer, Macomb, Monroe, Oakland, St. Clair, Wayne, and Genesee. So if you're in a situation where you have to testify, you have to be able to account where the data is coming from, what the sampling area is. And so it's very important to understand the why behind the data. Because if you ever want to die a slow death, and I don't know if it's ever happened to any of you, you get picked apart legally. Lawyers are not bad people, they're just doing their job. And if you're unprepared to discuss the pros and cons of the data, the strengths and weaknesses, you can have a very, very painful experience. 45 minutes seems like it's taking forever. So you got to be able to understand the data. So what we do is we look at the average weekly wage, and then more experienced or skilled workers, that's one standard deviation. So one standard deviation beyond the mean is more skilled workers. 2 standard deviations are highly experienced workers. And one of the things that we do is we predict ranges. We don't try to predict exact figures because of variance that you have from company to company. And then we look at the entry-level wages, less experienced and less well-educated workers. And then we do things like breaking this down into educational levels. And we take a look at things like work week and so forth. Top coding for females in this area is at or above $4,867.78 a week. So that's what we call top coding. That's the Pareto distribution. For males, it's a little higher. It's the way it is. Okay? Now, if we want to take a look at what is on the internet related to this particular occupation,